He followed the raging river, its once clear waters now dark and swollen with fury. The wind howled through the trees, whispering secrets only the storm could understand. Each step sank into the mud, but Ekenna pushed forward, his heart pounding like the distant thunder. At the edge of the forest, where the twisted roots of ancient trees clawed at the earth, he saw her. The beautiful witch Adanna. She stood on a jagged rock, her arms raised high, the storm swirling around her like a living beast. Lightning cracked behind her, casting eerie shadows on her face. Her long, dark hair whipped wildly in the wind, and her flowing robe seemed to merge with the storm itself. Ekenna's breath caught in his throat. He had never seen magic like this. "Why are you doing this?" he shouted, his voice barely cutting through the roar of the storm. Adanna turned slowly, her glowing eyes locking onto his. They burned with something ancient, something deep, pain, rage, and something else he could not name. "You people," she whispered, though her voice echoed like thunder. "You do not deserve peace." In a small village called Umyadike, surrounded by thick forests and rolling hills, life was once peaceful. The people farmed, fished, and celebrated under the warm African sun. But one day, everything changed. The trouble began when the villagers started throwing trash into the river and cutting down too many trees. The air grew hotter, the rains became unpredictable, and the once clear river turned brown and smelly. The elders warned everyone, "The land is angry. We must take care of it." But many people didn't listen. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a strange figure appeared at the edge of the village. She was a young woman with long, braided hair and eyes that glowed like fire. Her name was Adanna, and she was no ordinary woman, she was a witch. Adanna had once lived in the forest, but the pollution had driven her away. "You have poisoned the land," Adanna said, her voice echoing like thunder. "For this, your village will suffer." She raised her hands, and the sky darkened. A fierce storm began, with winds that howled like angry spirits and rain that fell like sharp needles. The storm did not stop. Day after day, it raged, flooding the farms and destroying homes. The villagers were terrified. They begged the elders for help, but even the elders didn't know what to do. That's when a young man named Ekenna stepped forward. Ekenna was brave and kind, with a heart as big as the sky. He had always loved the land and felt deep sadness for what had happened to it. "I will find a way to stop this storm," Ekenna declared. "I will make things right." The elders nodded, but they warned him, "Adanna is powerful. You must be careful." Ekenna set off into the storm, clutching a small charm his grandmother had given him for protection. The wind pushed against him, and the rain soaked his clothes, but he did not give up. He followed the raging river, its once clear waters now dark and swollen with fury. The wind howled through the trees, whispering secrets only the storm could understand. Each step sank into the mud, but Ekenna pushed forward, his heart pounding like the distant thunder. At the edge of the forest, where the twisted roots of ancient trees clawed at the earth, he saw her. The beautiful witch Adanna. She stood on a jagged rock, her arms raised high, the storm swirling around her like a living beast. Lightning cracked behind her, casting eerie shadows on her face. Her long, dark hair whipped wildly in the wind, and her flowing robe seemed to merge with the storm itself. Ekenna's breath caught in his throat. He had never seen magic like this. "Why are you doing this?" he shouted, his voice barely cutting through the roar of the storm. Adanna turned slowly, her glowing eyes locking onto his. They burned with something ancient, something deep, pain, rage, and something else he could not name. "You people," she whispered, though her voice echoed like thunder. "You do not deserve peace." The air grew heavy. The wind screamed louder. The storm was alive, and it was listening to her. Ekenna swallowed hard. How could he stop a force that was beyond human? But not all of us are guilty, Ekenna pleaded. Many of us want to fix what has been broken. Please, give us a chance. Adanna hesitated. She could see the honesty in Ekenna's eyes. But before she could respond, the ground beneath them began to shake. The storm grew even stronger, and a loud rumble filled the air. Ekenna knew time was running out. He had to convince Adanna to lift the curse, or the village would be lost forever. But how? Ekenna stood firm even as the ground shook and the storm roared around him. He looked into Adanna's fiery eyes and said, I know we've made mistakes, but we can change. If you help us, we will clean the river, plant new trees, and take care of the land. We will make Umidike beautiful again. Adanna's expression softened, but she still seemed unsure. Words are easy, she said. But actions are harder. How do I know your people will keep their promise? Ekenna thought for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small seed. It was a seed from the sacred Udala tree, a tree that was said to grow only where there was peace and balance. His grandmother had given it to him years ago, telling him to plant it when the time was right. Take this seed, Ekenna said, holding it out to Adanna. It's a symbol of my promise. If we fail, the seed will not grow. But if we succeed, it will bloom into a tree that will stand for generations, reminding us to protect the land. Adanna looked at the seed, then at Ekenna. For the first time, her glowing eyes seemed to dim, and a small smile touched her lips. You are different from the others, she said. But the storm will not stop until the land is healed. You must act quickly. Ekenna nodded. I will gather the villagers. We will start today. Adanna raised her hands again, and the storm seemed to pause for a moment. I will give you 1 moon cycle, she said. If the river is clean and the land begins to heal by the next full moon, the storm will end. But if you fail, the curse will remain forever. Ekenna thanked her and rushed back to the village. The wind and rain still battered him, but he felt a spark of hope. When he reached the village, he called everyone together. At first, the people were afraid and unsure. But when Ekenna told them about Adanna's warning and showed them the sacred seed, they agreed to help. The next morning, the entire village woke up early. The men, women, and even the children worked together. They cleaned the river, picking up all the trash and building barriers to stop more pollution. They planted new trees and created a special area for waste so they wouldn't harm the land again. Ekenna planted the sacred Udala seed in the center of the village, and everyone promised to protect it. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the village began to change. The river became clearer, and the air felt fresher. But the storm still raged, and the people grew tired. Some began to doubt if their efforts were enough. One night, as the full moon approached, Ekenna stood by the Udala seed. It had not yet sprouted, and he felt a knot of worry in his chest. He knew they had done so much, but would it be enough to satisfy Adanna? Just then, a soft voice called his name. He turned and saw Adanna standing at the edge of the village. Her glowing eyes were calm now, and she held a small, glowing orb in her hands. You have worked hard, she said. But the land is still wounded. There is one more thing you must do. Ekenna's heart raced. What is it? He asked. Adanna smiled. You must show the land your gratitude. The earth is not just something to use, it is alive, and it needs your respect. Ekenna nodded, understanding. He called the villagers together once more. Under the light of the almost full moon, they gathered around the Udala seed. They sang songs of thanks to the land, poured clean water from the river onto the soil, and promised to always care for it. As they finished, a soft green light began to glow from the ground. The Udala seed sprouted, its tiny leaves reaching toward the sky. The villagers cheered, but their celebration was cut short by a loud rumble in the distance. The storm was not over yet. The villagers watched in awe as the Udala seedling grew taller and stronger, its leaves shimmering in the moonlight. But the storm still raged above them, the winds howling and the rain pouring down. Ekenna turned to Adanna, his face filled with both hope and fear. "Is this enough?" he asked. "Will the storm end now?" Adanna looked at the growing tree, then at the villagers who had worked so hard to heal the land. She closed her eyes and whispered something in a language Ekenna couldn't understand. Suddenly, the glowing orb in her hands floated into the air and burst into 1,000 tiny lights, spreading across the village like fireflies. The storm began to calm. The wind slowed, the rain softened, and the dark clouds parted to reveal the bright full moon. The villagers cheered, their voices filled with relief and joy. Adanna turned to Ekenna and the villagers. "You have shown that you can change," she said. "You have cleaned the river, planted trees, and honored the land. But remember, this is only the beginning. The earth is not something you can take for granted. It is a gift, and it must be protected every day." Ekenna nodded, his heart full of gratitude. "We will never forget this lesson," he said. "We will take care of the land, not just for ourselves, but for generations to come." Adanna smiled, her fiery eyes now warm and kind. "Then the curse is lifted," she said. "But if you ever forget your promise, the storm will return." With that, Adanna turned and walked back into the forest, her figure fading into the shadows. The villagers watched her go, feeling both relief and a deep sense of responsibility. From that day on, Umyadike became a model for other villages. The people took care of their environment, teaching their children to respect the land and the river. The Udala tree grew tall and strong, its branches providing shade and its fruits bringing nourishment. It became a symbol of the village's promise to live in harmony with nature. Moral lesson. The story of Umyadike teaches us that the earth is a precious gift, and it is our responsibility to protect it. When we take care of the land, it takes care of us in return. But if we harm it, we harm ourselves. Let us always remember to respect and cherish the environment, not just for today, but for the future. The end.